Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here. Thank you to Fred, Landon, and the team at Atlantic Council for what is proving, I think, to be an absolutely wonderful forum, an incredible range of speakers and panels, and it's a great privilege to be here to take part of it. We're going to continue with the theme now on Europe, and also how Europe can move from crisis to lasting energy security. I was UK Energy Minister under David Cameron when we faced our fair share of crises, but nothing quite as significant as we're facing today. I think security comes in different formats. That we've got security when it comes to, and security is the building block of energy policy, because without it, what you have will not be affordable, and it certainly won't be clean. And I want to look today at a couple of different aspects of security. The security of where your source of energy is, because what we saw after Russia's invasion of Ukraine was that Europe paid a heavy price for being over-reliant on a single source of gas, namely Russia. And then the current crisis has shown the problem of routes of supply and security in that regard. And even though not much of the product coming through the Strait of Hormuz comes to Europe, we are still inevitably impacted by the supply constraints and the price increases which are happening elsewhere in the world. So it's time then to rethink our approach to energy security and to our energy resilience. I'm joined by a wonderful panel. On my immediate left, Ambassador Jovita Neliupšienė, who is the European Union's ambassador here to the United States and been here for the last 2.5 years, and previously the Deputy Foreign Minister for Lithuania. Joshua Volz, who is the Special Envoy for Global Energy Integration at the US Department of Energy. Ambassador Geoffrey Pyatt, the ubiquitous Geoffrey Pyatt, who seems to be on every panel and every meeting. Somebody who, when I first heard him speak, sounded as if he knew everything about everything and knows everybody, and indeed he does. Who was a former ambassador to both Greece and Ukraine, and Assistant Secretary for Energy. Kostis Sifneos, who is the VP and Managing Partner of Gas Trade. And at the end, Chris Trina, Executive Director of PAGE, which is the partnership to address global emissions. So let's look at three different aspects of this. First of all, have we learned the lessons of what we got wrong in Europe? Secondly, are the policies which we're now pursuing the ones which are the right ones to give us the energy resilience we need? And then to look at how we can improve that relationship between the US, Europe, and the UK. Ambassador, let me come to you first. How can Europe reduce its dependency on imported energy? Is the goal for the European Union to reduce the energy imports just in general, or is it to have a wider variety of routes of supply which come in? And linking into that, there's some skepticism about whether Europe can finally end its use of Russian gas next year. Can you update us on where that is and whether that's likely to definitely happen?
Well, thanks. Thanks a lot for having me on the panel, and thanks for the question. I think that to answer in the short way to your question will be all the above. And well, first of all, I think that right now the energy composition, the energy mix in Europe, from the very south to the very north of Europe, is such that we cannot get rid of imports. So you have to diversify, and diversify. This is probably the answer for the imports. You have to have the storage. You have to have the reserves. You have to follow through your rules to make sure that what you get is the best what you can get on the market, so don't harm climate too much. Then you go to what you can produce domestically. So for us, all the renewables, probably for the first time in the very long period when we apply our green policies, actually is that the green is not only about climate change anymore, it's about energy security, because the renewables are the resources which we can actually produce at home. And And on top of that, as we learn from the experience of Ukraine, renewables are extremely very good in ensuring energy security because they are dispersed. It's not centralized. So if we really go to this very dark scenario, we can actually end up pretty well. Last, not least, I think that dependency is vulnerability. So our dependence on Russian gas and oil, which was around 45%, in some places even more, was really very tough lesson and very costly lesson to learn. And I think that one thing is to have your sanctions, as we have coordinated with UK and 50 more our partners, but another is actually to legislate. And the people who have any skepticism of how it will happen, well, in Europe we walk the talk. If we said that there is a law, the law which actually puts in place dates, those dates sticks. So as of 1st of January, the new contracts are prohibited by law on gas. As of 21st of April this year, the short-term LNG contracts from Russia are prohibited, and long-term LNG contracts will be prohibited. LNG contracts will be prohibited as of 1st of 2027. And you know, we can go one by one, and the long-term contracts of the pipelines will be prohibited of September 2027. Can we do that faster? Probably. Can we agree, all 27 people in the room? No, not yet. But we are getting there, and there is a point of no return. Last but not least, efficiency. Sorry, guys, but we have to reduce the gas usage and fossil fuel usage in Europe. And actually, when the crisis comes, our citizens proved quite resilient in a way. When we had to do that back in 2022 and 2023, I can tell you, in some places they reduced gas usage by private citizens, not only by companies, by 30%. That's actually amazing. So I think that all the above is the answer.
Very good. You said diversity, diversity, diversity. There's a Winston Churchill quote for everything, and he said, when it comes to energy, security comes from diversity alone. He said that over 100 years ago, and it's as true today as it was then. Joshua, let me come to you next. We hear talk in the United States about energy dominance. It's been a very strong theme of this conference, a very strong support, one senses, in the United States. But from a European perspective, there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm for being dominated, either by the United States or by anybody else. How do you reconcile the dialogue from the United States and the language which is coming through there with the desire which you would see in Europe for a more balanced range of different suppliers and a much wider range of diverse sources?
Sure, thank you. Look, both the message and the messenger are important when it comes to communicating things like policy. And what we are seeking from the administration's perspective is strength across the board. And as the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, our ability to provide that diversity that is the pillar and the foundation of energy security, as we've discussed, is vital. And so our ability to produce those molecules and to strengthen those relationships and increase the arterial flow from the United States of those molecules to our partners and allies throughout the world is the core of the U.S. energy dominance agenda. And what the administration is doing is taking all the necessary steps here at home to make sure that we can accelerate the production of those resources so that our partners and allies do have those alternative choices. You know, Russia was sending 24 BCMA 10 years ago from the north to the south. And through the vertical corridor, we'll be able to get somewhere between 7 and 8 coming from the south into the north through Greece. That's a significant delta. And that's at current economic and industrial rates, which we hope our European partners and allies are able to increase as we seek to see increased defense spending, domestic production of weapons and material necessary to strengthen NATO and our Euro-Atlantic alliance. So we're going to need more. And I agree with the ambassador that this can't come at the expense of the diversification of both sources and routes. But having spent the predominant amount of my time working on some of these energy corridors in southeastern Europe, I've had the privilege to spend a lot of time by the sea over the last several months. And having grown up a sailor, I know that when you want to sail in a direction, the wind isn't always blowing in that singular direction. And so if you want to continue to move, you have to tack, and you have to adjust the way that you're moving in that ship to continue on the overall trajectory that you seek. And I think the energy security conversation, the energy diversity conversation is no different.
Joshua, thank you. And I think it's right that we put on record as well our appreciation for you for the tireless work which you do into trying to build those relationships and that trust. Geoffrey, if we look at some of the changes which have happened since 2022, we've seen a huge amount of investment in LNG. The Germans did it remarkably quickly. We've now seen new investment coming into other sources for LNG. But there still remain bottlenecks in terms of the supply. You've been leading some work with Atlantic Council on how we address those issues. What have been the conclusions that you've reached, and what are the lessons to be learned?
So I think, Charles, first of all, thank you for framing the issue. Thank you for the very gracious introduction. And I would just emphasize, first and foremost, an appreciation of exactly how far Europe has come over the past 4.5 years of the full-scale invasion. And I have a somewhat unique perspective because I was living in the European Union as U.S. ambassador in Athens when this all began. And I was listening very carefully to Minister Papastavrou just before us. And the sort of calm determination that we heard from him was very different from the atmosphere in the winter of 2021-22 when there was near panic. And I think, as you say, Europe has gone very, very quickly to build out additional regas capacity, new gas transmission corridors, reverse flow options, for instance, through the old Trans-Balkan pipeline. But the other side of the coin is huge growth in liquefaction capacity here in the United States, and a really historic opportunity for Europe to rewire its energy system with a very strong and mutually beneficial partnership with the United States and U.S. gas suppliers. 70% of America's LNG exports today go to the European Union. That's a material fact which will endure from one administration to another. You asked about some of the reports that have been done. I commend to everybody the new Atlantic Council report, which is available outside. But one of the points that comes through there is the need to do more on regulatory issues. When I was in government, I had the privilege of working closely with Director General Dita Jorgensen, and my team in the State Department's Energy Bureau did a lot of work to help identify what were those regulatory bottlenecks, things like pancaking of transmission tariffs, some of the issues tied up with European competition policy. This was a high priority for DG Energy, and I think that will be the case as well under the new Director General. There are also, I think, some very interesting ideas coming from American gas producers about how to consolidate markets and consolidate demand. Josh talked about the work that we've all done together on the vertical corridor. How about selling gas into a vertical corridor, an integrated vertical corridor market? And then this connects to my work on Ukraine, because one of the things that Europe will need in an energy future, which, as the ambassador described, will be fully decoupled from Russia by next year, is the stability of markets that large-scale storage provides. For many, many years, that storage was in St. Petersburg. If there was a cold snap in Europe, somebody called St. Petersburg, you called Gazprom, and they opened the taps. That's not going to be how it's going to work in the future. But Europe has a tremendous opportunity because of the relationship with Ukraine, and in particular, the significant volumes of gas storage that Ukraine has and Ukraine's full integration with the European market. So I think one of the other to-do items that I would suggest to European leadership is to accomplish on the gas side what is already being accomplished on the power transmission side, which is the full and complete integration of Europe's market with the Ukrainian market. That requires work on the Ukrainian side in terms of reform of pricing structures, but it's also a natural way to build those synergies in a way that is also complementary to what America's gas producers have produced. And maybe my last point on this, when I was in government, I always made the point, and I will do it again today, I don't think, when I travel to Houston or Pittsburgh and I talk to regular Americans who work in this industry, I'm not sure there's always appreciation of just how incredibly important America's gas abundance has been to our national security, and in particular, the way in which we have been able to rally with our NATO allies to refute Putin's intention to redraw the map of Europe.
Thank you. And let's stick with the vertical corridor issue, and Kostas, may I come to you? That I think it's probably misleading to look at Europe as a single entity. It's really a continent with multiple different energy challenges in different areas. You're particularly familiar with the Eastern Mediterranean, the areas around the Black Sea. Gas trade has been instrumental, one of the leading organizations involved in the vertical corridor linking Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Ukraine, which could be transformative. Tell us where you've got to in that program and what is going to be delivering in terms of security for that part of Europe.
Well, thank you, Charles, and I really appreciate being here and being in a panel with such distinguished colleagues. Ambassador Pyatt has been instrumental in reshaping, well, changing the mindset in southeastern Europe in terms of how we work together and how we can actually face the challenges which have evolved from the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Now, in fact, yes, Europe is you cannot consider Europe as one totally similar geography. If you start drawing a line from Ukraine to Central Europe, Slovakia, Hungary, and south, I think this is a large island within Europe where at the start of the invasion, you didn't have that interconnectivity that is needed for the energy to flow across. And mind you that as we speak, the only region that still receives Russian gas now is exactly that region from gas which is coming through Turkey into Bulgaria, into that region. Now, really, when the regulation is fully in place by the end of next fall, the countries and the markets that will be mostly affected are the markets within this region. Therefore, interconnectivity and the ability to substitute Russian gas with alternatives, which there are not too many. They have a 3-digit alternative, which is LNG. And we see that most of that will probably come from the US. So we have been promoting the ability to diversify the supply of gas in all this region, and one of the entry points is now from the south to the north, from Greece into this region. And I would like to think the vertical corridor not as the route from Greece to Ukraine only, but also the route to the Western Balkans, to Hungary and Slovakia. Because these are the markets which are going to be mostly affected by the phasing out of Russian gas. Alexandroupolis terminal is, I think, crucial to that diversification. It's now operating for 1.5 years. It can supply about 50 cargoes of LNG into this region. It's not enough for covering this region, but I think it's really crucial for the vertical corridor from south to north. I mean, there are other options for supplying this region from Poland in the north, from Croatia in the west. But we need to see the role of Greece, which has totally changed strategically in this region following the invasion of Russia into Ukraine.
I think it's been inspiring to see both the vision and the speed of delivery for that particular project. Chris Page has also helped in the report with Atlantic Council. looking at how the EU and Europe more generally can diverse in its sources of supply. Can you tell us more about the conclusions and also what Page has brought to that as an organization?
Yeah, sure. Context on Page I think would help, because one of the reasons we started and launched Page with our founding members EQT and Williams was because we saw the opportunities here in the US to decarbonize even in 2024, as recently as then. Simply switching from coal to natural gas was our greatest emissions reduction tool, and a market-driven one at that. And so we had this approach that we should get out there and start talking about policies that can support our friends and allies around the world in their ability to also decarbonize through US LNG. Of course, once Russia invaded Ukraine, it became a quick education for us that you can't talk about decarbonization through US LNG unless you have secured energy in Europe. As the cargoes flowed rightfully from Southeast Asia or other destinations into Europe based on spot market prices or other mechanisms, we came to realize that this is an interconnected problem, both the decarbonization opportunities for US LNG, but also the energy security of our allies around the world. And so we began engaging. It started obviously as education about the incredible resources we have, even just among our members in the US, and the ability to displace Russian gas. We could not be more encouraged that we're at that tipping point of potentially being where we were at with as much US LNG going to Europe as there was Russian piped gas before the war. And I think should be a great moment of celebration and something that we're certainly proud of the role that the US industry played in helping achieve that. But the study, concludes that certainly, aggregate EU may have a black eye, but that there is a role to be played for these coordinated efforts, that we do have interconnected infrastructure systems that must be considered, that much of the infrastructure built along the coasts needs to be supplemented by internal infrastructure, which is exactly the same problem we have in the US and why we need permitting reform, which is a different panel discussion for the US. But nonetheless, I certainly would encourage folks to take a look at the study. I think it provides some insights on where creditworthiness issues can be overcome by buyers clubs. I think we've heard from the previous panel about all of the triangles, circles, verticals, and I think it's just encouraging for those of us that have been engaged on this side of the Atlantic with our European counterparts to see that they're thinking about these things in coordinated, regional, and of course continental ways.
Very good. Let's move on now to looking at some of the actions which are being implemented now, how policies are being put in place to address these things. Josh, let me come to you. The US administration has been, how shall I say, occasionally skeptical about some of the energy policies being pursued in different parts of Europe. Are you seeing, though, a greater integration now, people taking on board some of the guidance, advice, views from Washington and moving in a direction which you think delivers a more holistic approach to energy security and energy well-being?
Well, I think what we're seeing, as Chris pointed out, is a really important lesson learned at a really painful cost, and that is the over-reliance on a single source of energy or an over-reliance on a single type of generation. And our partners want to see industrial growth and economic growth. They see what's happened in the United States with the tremendous influx of foreign direct investment as incentivized by tax policies that make it advantageous to invest and industrialize in the United States, as opposed to a system of penalization if you don't move in a certain direction. So it's incentivization versus penalization. And I think that's really starting to resonate in a lot of jurisdictions. I think it's also been interesting to watch the tension that has arisen from the drive towards decarbonization in Europe, but the drive towards industrialization and increased energy security. And there is tension there. And that's being navigated with a series of conversations between the United States as the largest producer of oil and gas, the most reliable producer of oil and gas, U.S. industry having never missed a contracted cargo, even through natural disaster and tremendous struggle at some points in our production capacity. So I think that realization is soaking in, but there is very real tension that has to be navigated between those aspirations and the way to balance the two. So we're encouraged by the conversation and the direction of travel, but I think that it needs to be accelerated because I'm not sure that the aspirations and the policies are syncing up at the right speed to really help replace and do what President Trump and President von der Leyen has agreed is the right direction of travel, which is to really purge the European energy system of an unreliable partner, and by the way, the highest carbon intensity producer of natural gas in the world.
Ambassador Jovita, can I also get your response to these issues? Because that if you, in response to some of that skepticism from the US, but also growing skepticism within Europe, I think, about the net zero agenda, do the countries of Europe need to reassess that agenda? Do they need to perhaps make it less absolute, look at the timescales for doing it in order to respond to the current energy challenges?
Look, first of all, let me put a bit in the perspective. EU is the largest buyer of American LNG. We buy more than all the other countries of the world taken together. We buy at least 54%. 2 years ago, last year probably it will be even more. So, and this actually constitutes around 30% of our gas imports. So this probably, for the people who are experts of energy in this whole, puts a bit of the light what kind of the pressures we actually experiencing. We rely a lot on imports. Let me give you another point of statistics. 3 years ago, we bought, not 3 years, 4 years ago, we spent more than 100 billion on Russian gas. Now we spend less than 12 billion. It's a significant decrease. And yes, the strategic partnerships matters, because if not American LNG, we probably would be in much worse a situation than we are right now. But the same matters as Norwegian imports, who are as well members of NATO. So to make sure that we have their competitive supplies and diversified supplies, this is the key issue. Of course, we will always, because we are importers, we will be always looking for their competitive price. That's really not a secret, because we are paying much more. But on the other hand, we have to have to respond to the citizens' interest of having cleaner and more sustainable energy in our systems. Yes, there is a tension. Industry will always would wish to see less pricey energy resources. Yes, the technology development is tremendous, and tremendous, of course, in the United States for the case of this. And we need all the energy, all the above. Whatever we can produce, and in this case, in particular, this geopolitical situation, whatever we can import at the moment. And on top of that, we need to have as much flexibility within our energy system as possible. So I would agree that actually our investments right now, first of all, should be in the transmission systems, in the interconnectivities inside the EU. Not only vertical corridor, which is moving at an amazing pace, but as well, Poland, as well the Amber corridor from Lithuania, Klaipėda, and anything you can do. And I think that what would be at a certain point, especially in 2030, because energy is the sector where you think a few years ahead. Is there really a new capabilities of American energy exports coming online? Because right now we see just the plans till 2030. This is what the people would do. And we, as a huge 450 million market, we have to accumulate the demand. This is probably the direction of travel. But citizens will still want to see, and most of the American companies actually really are the best. Some of the LNG which is exported has the best scores in the offset of carbon offset. So we are really proud of this partnership.
Very good. Chris, let me come to you. And to what extent has Page looked at the moves within Europe to decarbonize its energy, particularly its electricity systems? Do you think that it can continue to decarbonize at the pace which it is going and still keep prices affordable for both consumers and for industry?
Yeah, well, I think they'll have no choice. But I certainly do, and I think that U.S. LNG will play a critical role in that. It's no secret of our founding member EQT, has the lowest methane intensity natural gas of anyone in the U.S. and competitive with European producers as well. And so there will necessarily be a role to play for that low methane natural gas, and I'm sure European buyers will be looking to secure that. Our members, certainly in Page, take a 10, 15, 20-year time horizon look at their environmental and commercial investments. And so I don't expect that there's going to be a change within the U.S. industry moving away from the investments that it's already made in methane. I think that it's a competitive advantage for our industry. We've seen, significant reductions in methane intensity based on market forces already in the United States, and I think that those market forces will continue, and Europe is certainly continuing to send the signals to American companies that it is going to stand by those commitments. And kudos to the European Commission and others that have been very heavily engaged with U.S. entities over here. I think they've been working in good faith to try to find solutions. There's been a lot of education on both sides of the Atlantic about the way our molecules move over here in the U.S. and the way that the contracts and flows have to happen over in Europe, and of course a steep learning curve for some of us on the European system of making decisions as well. And so I think, obviously times of crisis lead us much closer as allies together than they do divide us apart. And so I think, to the extent that the crisis has played that role in bringing us together, I'm sure that the decarbonization priorities of Europe and the supply opportunities of the United States will align.
That's great. Kostas, we've spoken about the LNG facilities in Germany. We've talked about the vertical corridor. We've talked about some of the other developments which are coming through. Do you think it's fair to say that Europe, from a low base, has now responded adequately to the challenge, or are there other new sort of strategic routes which are going to be necessary?
Yeah, I think when you actually act in resolving some major infrastructure issues, you need to have flexibility. And Brussels have not been, let's say, famous for the flexibility. Yeah, so I think we need to start looking at creating products which are responsive to the needs of the markets. In a way that has been done for the vertical corridor, at least for one branch that we define as vertical corridor. When you do that, you do it, for solidarity to Ukraine. But now I think we also need to look what we need to do for solidarity to the landlocked countries. And I see my friend Szabolcs is here from Hungary, and I think he understands very well what I mean. There's one other thing which is quite important, which is associated with the Strait of Hormuz and the conflict in the Middle East. This has drawn out of the market significant portions of LNG. So Ambassador Pyatt was saying 70% of US LNG is going to Europe. Right now it's about 50%, because a lot of it is now going to the Far East, because the margins are better. So we might see ourselves facing a security of supply issue this winter, rather than just a diversification issue. And I think here is the opportunity to start changing the mindset of buyers, which, you know, they come from the legacy of long-term Russian contracts with Gazprom. But now they kind of went to a very short-term opportunistic approach in buying LNG. Now maybe it's the time that buyers and sellers, however, try to set up more longer-term relationships, offering a competitive and affordable energy in these times of crisis.
Very good. Geoffrey, we've heard about Ukraine. You talked about it earlier on. You probably know it better than almost anybody else in this forum. They've seen so much of their energy infrastructure destroyed that Maxim Timchenko of DTEC at a conference in London recently talked about the importance of distributed energy, so you haven't got massive nuclear plants, massive gas plants, massive grid infrastructure which can be targeted by an enemy. What advice do you give to the Ukrainian government for how they build that system in a resilient way?
So the first point I would make, Charles, and listening to my friend Chris over here, the one country where I never hear complaints about permitting is Ukraine. And being invaded by a nuclear-armed neighbor will do that to you. And I've had the privilege, since leaving government, of continuing to work closely with a number of Ukrainian companies. DTEC is one of them. And it was fascinating for me. I was in Kyiv in September when DTEC inaugurated what is in the process of becoming Europe's largest Eastern Europe's largest battery energy storage system. And then I came back here to Washington, and I went up to Ballston to see the CEO of Fluence, the battery company, joint venture of Siemens and AES that was the supplier to Ukraine. And the CEO, Julian Nabrata, made the point to me that he was able, and his team was able to move faster in Ukraine than they were able to deploy anywhere else in the world. So I think there are some lessons there. I was in Kyiv last week, and one of the things that came through loud and clear in those discussions is Ukraine's understanding now that energy is a core component of national security. That's why my old bureau, the Bureau of Energy Resources at the State Department, was created, was to acknowledge and to leverage that fact. And I think for all of us, thinking about energy as both a affirmative component of national security strategy, but also as a vulnerability that has to be protected. That's the new reality we face, and of course, the past 4 months in the Gulf have reinforced that lesson. And then maybe the third observation I would make is, and sometimes not appreciated sufficiently here in Washington, Ukraine is going to win. I think that's clear now as you watch what's happened on the battlefield. Putin is bogged down. His efforts to target energy infrastructure in order to achieve what his armies have failed to secure on the battlefield has clearly failed. And you see that in the determination of Ukraine's public. So for Europe, thinking about the opportunity and the challenge that incorporating 40 million Ukrainians as members of the European Union is important, but also for American business. Last observation from my most recent visit. I drove in, which meant I went through Bucha, and everybody remembers the terrible images from the spring of 2022 following Russia's occupation of Bucha and the tremendous human rights violations that took place there. When I knew I was going to drive through Bucha, I was expecting Berlin in 1947, bombed out buildings and incomplete reconstruction. What I saw looked like Tyson's Corner. And one element of that is that DTEC, working with GE Vernova, rebuilt the Bucha substation much, much faster than anybody expected. Again, because of this determination of the Ukrainians to demonstrate that they are going to be good Europeans. They want to be part of Europe. And I think for Europe, which is grappling with all of the issues of competitiveness and energy diversification that the ambassador talked about, Ukraine is a spectacular opportunity because it is a true all-of-the-above power. It has a very strong nuclear base. It has terrific oil and gas upstream potential. It's very, very serious about its renewables, including a significant wind asset, especially towards the Black Sea littoral, and then potential to be very successful in new energy areas like biogas and geothermal. So I think thinking about, and this is something I'll be doing with Atlantic Council colleagues in 2 weeks at the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference in Gdansk, thinking about Ukraine as an energy opportunity for Europe and as a natural complement to Europe's incredibly important decoupling from Russian supplies. And maybe to finish on this point, for 20 years, going back to my time working for Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot, it has been an objective of the United States to wrest Europe away from Russian energy supplies. Next year, in 2027, that goal of a bipartisan US policy approach will be achieved, and it wouldn't have been achieved without the strong leadership of America's energy producers, including many of the companies that are here in this room. So I'm incredibly proud to have been part of that story, but also excited about what it means for our transatlantic relationship, but also for America's national security interests.
Very good. I think very inspiring message. Thank you for doing that. We've got just a few minutes left. I just want to touch briefly on the European-US relationship. And Geoffrey, let me stick with you, that with some of the language which we hear coming out of the United States towards Europe, to what extent do you think in Europe we're oversensitive, that we'd hear that and we allow it to disrupt the relationship? Should we just treat it as a bit of background noise and get on with actually doing the business? Or do you think it does make those partnerships more difficult?
So I'll be very brief. I think language matters, but I do think this is background noise. And the reason I say that is that energy is distinct in that it's a sector where no investment is complete in 4 years. Every energy CEO I worked with in government was thinking in 10 or 20-year increments. And if you look over that long term, and you look at, and you know, when I talk to the CEOs of Total, Eni, Repsol, Equinor, all of them have huge investments in the United States because of what Josh talks about, the fact that we have such energy abundance, so you can't miss this opportunity. But for America's producers, we've already talked about our gas companies, but look at all the other sectors where America is globally competitive, entertainment, digital. These are all places where Europe is our most important market. And so we're going to get this right. I think the Trump administration misses an opportunity, for instance, not continuing the work that Josh and I worked together on with the US-EU Energy Council, which was a very important venue to harmonize our policy approaches. But I think this will also come back over time.
Okay. Ambassador Jovita, that when you hear a lot of the conversation at the moment is about tariffs, about the unpredictability of those, does Europe look absolutely as the US as a trusted partner where it can build those long-term trading relationships on LNG and it knows that they're going to be delivered when they're expected?
Look, I can tell you the story of American LNG from totally different perspective. I'm coming from the country which actually received the first LNG shipment from United States of America. And I can tell you it took a hell of the work to make it happen with some of our friends from LNG allies. We actually have to go out and to persuade Americans to export LNG, to give the license to American companies. We spend a lot of hours, and Jeff and Josh, I'm sure, knows the story, which is behind. It was Europeans persuading Americans to give the license to your companies to export. And I think, and there was a lot of, you say noise, I would say there was a lot of arguments behind that, against that, and we spent hours with that. And look where we are. Of course, you know, the tragedy of Russia's aggression in Ukraine helped us as well. But I think if we have a determination, if we have a policy alliance, maybe not alliance, a policy coordination, I think we can go quite a long way. So I think that the recognition that we actually move each other to the right direction, I think this is where this strategic partnership works. So I still expect some nice statue somewhere for that.
Very good. Well, we're almost out of time, but I just want to give the final word to Josh. There's been a lot of talk about renewables, about gas, but I want to talk about nuclear, because for some of the countries where the relationship on renewables may be a little bit strained, there's huge scopes, whether it's with the United Kingdom, for great cooperation on next generation, on SMRs, AMRs, on fusion. how do you see that panning out, and how do we make that relationship really work?
Sure. Thanks. Look, it's been an incredible conversation, and I want to touch on just 3 quick points. I think one is that we need to shift our paradigm from getting through the crisis to learning to live in the crisis. The idea that these are fragmentary elements in human history that will go away just isn't borne out by the arc of human history. Human history is beset with crisis. And so if we are developing policies, both financial, infrastructural, energy, that are the equivalent of holding our breath underwater until we can come back up for air, which is normal, I think we will absolutely miss the opportunity to optimize what the future of all of these energy systems and these opportunities look like. So first, we live in crisis. We don't get through it. Secondarily, I think what's been talked about a lot is really important, and that is a systemic approach to the solution. It has to be from the wellhead to the scope 3 end use consumer, and those things have to be coordinated in a way that they just aren't. They're still more disjointed than they need to be. And if we're going to find those optimizations that are best for producers, best for consumers, best for diversification, and best for energy security, it has to be a systemic approach. Third, I think that in the end, what we need to do is we need to focus on the fact that there are more opportunities than there are obstacles. And if what we choose to do is focus on the obstacles, then that's where we're going to spend all of our time. So focusing on the opportunity versus the obstacle, I think, is really important. Now, nuclear. Nuclear's, from a Department of Energy perspective, it's not just the future, it is the present. And it will be an increasingly large part of the future. And as new nuclear technology continues to diffuse both in Europe and in the United States, we are going to see a massive shift in the way that the world delivers energy. You're going to see a massive shift in terms of the way that industrialization takes place. High process heat will increasingly be generated by nuclear energy. The shipping industry, which is, the beating heart of global commerce, 90% of the world's commerce moves by water. We've had small nuclear reactors in our ships and in our submarines since the early 90s here in the United States. To think that that's not going to diffuse to the commercial sector would be, again, to miss an opportunity. So it really is the cornerstone of a future energy system. That is the very definition. Nuclear is the very definition of a long-term relationship. These are relationships that are 100 years plus. But there's some things that we need to get right in that relationship as well. And we don't want to trade one vulnerability for another. And the nuclear supply chain in the United States and globally remains vulnerable. So we have to work on increasing the security of that supply chain if we're going to realize the full impact and opportunity of the nuclear sector.
Well, look, that's a great place to end. Thank you very much. Thanks to Atlantic Council for bringing us together, giving us a chance to talk about these issues in such a collaborative, strong partnership approach. I think your phrase there, Josh, that we should be focusing on the opportunities, not the obstacles, should be the message which we take out, ringing in our ears at the end of this. But please go and show real appreciation and round of applause for this excellent panel, for Jovita, Josh, Geoffrey, Costas.